You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, delicious friends, and welcome to Who Did What Now, the history podcast that's not your history class, with me, your host, Katie Charlwood, history harlot and reader of books. Books which may have frightened some fully grown men this week. So I am getting some renovations done at home, because we need them, and the house has not been touched in 20 years. And so we're just updating it and fixing things and making it livable, effectively. And so my bedroom is currently being used as storage. And I received some lovely Valentine's gifts this year, which were, books. Are we surprised? Books. It's always books. Because I had some lovely gentlemen send me some books this year. Because I posted it on my Instagram, and sometimes if you ask, you shall receive. So some lovely fellas sent me some books, sort of unexplained mysteries. I got Dr. Kate Lister's book. Now, I don't know if you've seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, but whenever someone goes Jack Sparrow and everyone goes, Captain Jack Sparrow. Yeah, that's me with Dr. Kate Lister. Anytime someone calls her Kate Lister, I'm like, Dr. Kate Lister. But yeah, I got her book, and I also got another book, which is very beautiful, and I had it sitting just like on top of a bunch of stuff in the room, and the builder goes in, and he obviously sees this beautiful book, catches his eye. It's black and green and kind of iridescent and beautiful, but it also happens to be The League of Lady Poisoners. This does not go down too well, especially when you see the other volumes in the room, because I have like Skeleton's Guide to Domestic Poisons. I have I think one's just called Poison. So many different ways to kill people: murder mile, unexplained deaths, which just seem to not go down too well. And then my mum had to explain, that I collect books about old-timey death, which did not help matters much. On top of that, she eventually said, she's a historian and she does this, and they're like, okay, weird, but it's fine, I guess. So that was that. There was a fun time, and it gave me a good laugh this week because I have been busy, because I am organising tours. I'm in talks for sort of places in the UK. I'm Newcastle, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, London, I guess, Cardiff. Could I come to Cardiff? Maybe, if there's a place for me to be. Edinburgh's on the list, Glasgow. I know the Glasgow tickets have actually gone on sale, and at time of recording, half the tickets are gone. So half the tickets are already gone for the Glasgow show. So if you want to come see me, you're gonna want to get those tickets, because they're actually going pretty fast. Trying to think, I'm in talks for I've got a show in Cork as well, but that's not till September. I'm trying to get Belfast sorted. There's just so many things. I've reached out to a few festivals, and it's just a busy old time. It's a lot going on, but I want to come out. I want to come see you. I want you to come see me. And yeah, it's just, I didn't realize how stressful organising a tour all by myself would be. But here we are. And sometimes you can do it if you just make yourself do it and have no other choice. Like, if there's no other option and you've only got one road to take, then you take that road. And that seems to be a lot of it with this podcast. It's like, how did you end up doing A, B, and C? I had zero choice in the matter, friends. Just how it happened. But I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, quit your jibber jabber and fact me. In fact you I will. But first, we've got to get our source on. Our sources are I Know My Own Heart, The Diaries of Anne Lister, 1791 to 1840, by Anne Lister. Anne Lister of Shibden Hall, Halifax, Her Diaries and the Historians, by Jill Liddington. Anne Lister, The First Modern Lesbian, by Richter Norton. Gentleman Jack of Halifax, by Elizabeth Mather. Gentleman Jack, The Real Anne Lister, by Anne Choma. Miss Lister of Shibden Hall, Selected Letters, by Muriel Green. And of course we have our old favourites, biography.com and history.com. Are you sitting comfortably? Good. Then let's begin. So I promised you a lesbian, and a lesbian you shall receive. Anne Lister, known as Gentleman Jack. She is like a prolific diarist, if nothing else. She's known as the first modern lesbian because she's one of the first open and known cases of lesbianism in, well, recent history. And she wrote everything down. Like, she time-stamped things. She kept journals. Like, first it was like loose papers and bits and pieces, but then she actually kept journals. But she wrote them in this cipher, this secret code. And it was like, how do I put it? Like, it was a combination of numbers, letters, zodiac symbols, Greek letters, just a combination of this different forms of language, which, when they are decoded, the funny thing is, when the diaries are decoded, people didn't want to publish them because they are graphic as fuck. Like, Anne Lister wrote in detail about everything from going here and having a chat to how she went down on a woman to what she ate for lunch that day. Like, everything is fastidious, but also rather salacious. And it is wild, to be honest. And it's such a shock for the people who are, like, transcribing it, because they could not believe that a woman wrote this. Like, they actually thought it was a fake initially. People thought this had to be some kind of hoax because they couldn't believe that a woman, especially a woman in this era, was writing in this fashion. But I am getting ahead of myself, and we should go to the beginning. So Anne Lister is born on the 3rd of April 1791 in Halifax, which is in West Riding of Yorkshire, England, United Kingdom, so on and so forth. She is the second child of Jeremy Lister, who served in the British Army, and he fought in the American War of Independence. So he lost. Yeah. So he had married Rebecca Battle. So she was the child of Jeremy Lister and Rebecca Battle. So her older brother John didn't last past a year. And then it was Anne. And then it was Samuel. And then a few more. But effectively, I think there was three daughters, 4 sons. But only Anne and her younger sister Marion are the only girls to live past 20. Which is not surprising because, like, you know, it's the past. People die a lot. Like, from everything. I mean, the Victorian diseases are coming back. Scurvy has returned. Scurvy. Like, because people aren't getting enough oranges. Like, fuck's sakes, mate, have a tangerine. Like, a clementine. A satsuma. Like, just a lemon. At this point, I usually tell people to go suck on a frozen lemon, right? As an insult. But now I think they should do it for the benefit of their fucking health. Anywho, I'm getting ahead of myself. So, and she's a bit of a tomboy growing up. Effectively, she grows up like the man of the manor. Effectively, she wasn't darning and making tea, which a lot of the time, when someone is referred to as a tomboy, especially in the past, It just means that they aren't specifically being incredibly ladylike. My favourite part of it was they kept referring to her as an unmanageable tomboy, as if it would somehow be better if, she could do masculine things, but they could control her. But they could not. She was very much her own person from the get-go. And when she's 7, this isn't unusual for anyone. She gets sent off to, boarding school. And so she goes to boarding school in Ripon, and that's run by Mrs. Cheddle and Mrs. Higgs. And when she's 10, she gets educated at home. Did the school finish at that age? Did it not? For whatever reason, she was back home and she was being educated by the local Reverend George Skelding. I say the Reverend, he's a vicar. It's the same thing. The local vicar, the Reverend, whatevs. So she is being educated by the vicar when she's at home, but when she goes and visits her aunt and uncle, who own Shibden Hall, she is taught by Mrs. Mellon, who may be a governess. It's the past. It's before the diaries, so it's very vague, to say the least. Now, when she's in her sort of tween to teen years, she ends up being sent to a boarding school. 14. She's 14. She goes to the Manor House School in York. Although, it was the King's Manor buildings, I think. So she goes there and she doesn't stay in the dormitory with the rest of the girls. Oh, no. She's in the attic room away from them. Is it because she was causing trouble and they didn't want her, attitude and behaviour to rub off on the other girls? Was it because she was the daughter merely of a captain and as such wasn't as wealthy and did not deserve to be in the dormitories? Or was it because she was gay? Whom's to say? We don't know why they put her in the attic specifically, but she didn't mind for many reasons, one of which being she had a roommate, Eliza Rain. Now, Eliza was from India. She had been sent there because her father died. She was the illegitimate daughter of William Rain, a surgeon in the East India Company. Now, we all know my opinions on the East India Company, but yeah. He was, she was illegitimate, and then he died. So she was put under the guardianship of William Duffin, who was a surgeon in York. So that was both Eliza and her sister Jane. So when Anne and Eliza are at the school together and they're sharing the attic bedroom, which they named, by the way, they called it the Slope. Now, as someone who used to live on a road that was called the Line, I can't say anything to anybody about naming locations, but the Slope is where they stayed. And that is where they began their relationship. And it's also the point where Anne starts keeping a diary. And she starts making notes and she starts writing in. Well, parts of the diary are in what's called crypthand. Now, over the course of her life, I think 1/6 of the diary is in this crypthand, which is a combination of Greek letters, zodiac symbols, numbers, dashes, codes. And probably this was brought to her by Elaine, or they worked it out together because they used to write letters in this coded language. And so they would start writing to each other using this code. And Elaine was already bilingual. She already spoke several languages. And Anne had a fascination with Grecian history especially. So they made this little language together, probably assuming that other people wouldn't be able to decipher it. But yeah. So they start spending time together, and when they were in school, they would have this relationship. And things were going well. Like, it was intense, like first loves are. Like, it was all consuming, all fulfilling. And that's where they had their first, experiences. So when they're not at school, they're writing letters to one another. And the letters get intercepted. And naturally, it's believed that Anne is the perpetrator, like she's the ringleader in this scenario. And Anne has to leave the school, like she's gotta go. They're like done with her, like, no, off you go, bye-bye. And it's after this that they start writing more carefully, because when they're 16, Eliza comes to visit Anne, and she stays for a few weeks, and after she leaves, people are not happy because it's very apparent that the two of them are having a relationship in, 19th century Britain. Like, we are still in the Regency period. One of the Georges is on the throne. Of course it is. There's so many Georges. It's just, there's too many at this point, but it's one of the Georges. And it's not going well for any of the Georges, frankly. No. It's not going well for any of the Georges. I just remembered, but we don't need to go into the Georges right now. So after spending a few weeks together and Eliza leaves, they start this sort of promise that they're going to spend their lives together, that it's going to happen, that they're going to live, like, not as man and wife, but like as wife and wife. Like, that's their plan, and that's their full intention. That's where they want to go. That's what they want to do. And Anne is promising to Eliza that, of course, this is it. Wonderful, definitely. And their relationship gets discovered to the point where, like, the coding becomes just more intricate and more extreme. And this is probably where Anne really starts focusing on writing her diary, like really logging everything to the extreme. So through Eliza, Anne starts meeting other people in society. So she starts, becoming connected to these people. Now, Anne Lister, now I love Anne Lister for many reasons, but how do I put this? If she weren't a woman, she would be a fuckboy. Like, I don't know how else to explain this to you. I know I said I support women's rights and that I also support women's wrong, but Anne Lister makes it hard sometimes, I'm just saying. She really does. So she promises Eliza that she's going to be with her forever, like this is her all-encompassing, like, love, it's a whole new world, it's a whole thing, right? It's Disney movie soundtrack love, right? But Anne starts getting a wee bit restless and starts looking elsewhere. So when Anne was shunned from the school, like she just couldn't go back anymore, and universities weren't really open for, women, she sort of focused on her own studies. So she was interested in, like, history and astronomy, languages, like, so much. Like, she hyperfixated, you might say. And so she lusted after knowledge, but knowledge was not the only thing she lusted after. That's right, I'm talking about ladies. You see, although she had promised herself to Eliza, and not just because she thought she loved her, but because you've seen Pride and Prejudice, or at least you know of Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility and anything by Jane Austen, which is generally about women needing to marry up because they needed money, because women weren't their own person, effectively. They were reliant on getting money from men or from, effectively one way or the other, from men, either from an estate or from an older brother or a father or a husband. They were reliant on them to, survive because it was required. That's what they needed to do. And so Anne wanted to live her life, but she couldn't do that broke, and she wasn't due to inherit anything because she had, brothers who were going to inherit everything, and if her aunt and uncle had any kids, like, they were going to have it, so there wasn't anything for her necessarily. But Eliza, even though she was the illegitimate daughter of the surgeon, of William Rain, she was due to inherit, like, a decent chunk. And so she's thinking, okay, this is fair enough, she says, because this is a glorious inheritance. And because Eliza was due to get just so much dough, the Anne would have been set, so they could have easily been together. Because, I mean, say what you want, she was focused, very focused. But yeah, she was looking at this. But then what happens is she starts meeting other women. So she is introduced to Isabella Norcliffe, known as Tib. And she meets her when she's about 20. And they meet and they become lovers and friends. This isn't a U-Haul lesbian situation because they're passionate. They have a very intense, passionate affair. But, the stars that burn the brightest usually burn out the fastest. And Anne is slowly becoming aware that she's rising in society. And as such, people's perception of her is changing. So she is more aware and more worried about what other people think of her. Like, she didn't really think so much as she was younger, but as she's gotten older, she is very much thinking about, others' perception of her socially. Especially as she's starting to move up within the class system, which is weird because I know you're thinking, oh, but if she's upper class, isn't she upper class? The class system in the UK is really weird. It always has been, always will be. Probably. So yeah, she's rising up and she's being introduced to society and she's meeting all these people, and Eliza is panicking because she doesn't understand. She wants to have the relationship. She wants this life with Anne. And she's writing these letters and she's panicking, and Anne's like, yeah, sure, absolutely, definitely. Completely fobbing her off every single time. And Eliza's starting to freak out. And the situation is worsened when Eliza's sister Jane is pregnant. She shows up pregnant. We don't know why, we don't know how. Well, we know how, obviously, but we don't know if this is consensual or non-consensual. We don't know the reasoning behind the circumstances that created the pregnancy, And as such, this is an illegitimate pregnancy, and this is 19th century England, so that is frowned upon. So it's a scandal, and Anne Lister doesn't want to have to do with scandal, even though her very existence is seen as scandalous. You know what I mean? She actually called her lesbianism her oddity, and she studied books and researched like biology and everything because she was trying to figure out like why she was the way she was, because she didn't realize that you're just born that way and it's cool, I mean, not to be an absolute fuck boy, but to be a Casanova, a Don Juan. No Anne, no, breaking hearts, it's not cool. But yeah, and so Anna's sort of moving away from that, and she starts seeing Isabella Norcliffe, known as Tib, and they're seeing each other, and they become lovers, obviously, as I said. And Eliza, it becomes very clear to her, she hears through the grapevine that, it's hard not to hear, because of course she's the bloody talk of the town, isn't she? That Anne is seeing other women and that she's chasing after other women, and all of this really starts affecting Eliza to the point that when Anne turns 23, that Eliza gets committed to an asylum. Like, she goes mad. Like, whether, it was triggered by Anne or whether this was something that was already underlying, we don't know. But this situation, I think with the social standing and everything that she already had was kind of precarious to begin with. She ends up in the asylum. And she's there for the next 50-ish years until Eliza dies in there in 1860. And on that delightful note, let's take a break with a word from our sponsors. Sexshopper is Ireland's most beloved sex toy retailer. Since 2012, they have been delighting the nation with a curated range of beautifully designed sex toys and accessories made exclusively from body-safe materials. Here you'll find only the best vibrators, dildos, anal toys, masturbators, Kegel balls, lubricants, and condoms. And even though the company may be loud and proud, they understand that, you might not want people peeking at your packages. And as such, every delivery is very typical and discreet, so they won't be raising any eyebrows. Although once you open them, they might be raising a few other things. And of course, shipping is free all over Ireland and the Republic and the North on all orders over €50. And the wonderful sexshopper.ie is offering my fantastic followers a 10% discount with the code HARLOTS10, HARLOTS 10, HARLOTS10 for 10% off your fun time needs. That's sexshopper.ie, sexsiopa.ie. Enjoy. So when Anne is 19, she meets Tib, Isabella Norcliffe, and, they hit it off like a house on fire. Isabella is confident. She's a socialite. She's from that sort of, the gentry. She's from that high class. And she's older and wiser, and Anne is fascinated by her, and she's attracted to her. And Isabella is just like wowed by Anne. And she hopes that they're going to become life partners, but Anne isn't feeling it. Like, they stay friends throughout their lives, and they go back to each other every and again. Like, they are, occasional lovers is the term that comes up more often. And so they stay connected, but they don't have any long-lasting romantic relationship with each other. And it's around about this time that Anne starts dressing in what is termed as a manly fashion. Now, when you hear masculine, you would assume trousers and other such sort of clothing. But Anne wasn't wearing trousers. She wasn't wearing men's clothing. She was wearing black, which is what men wore riding. That was riding gear for men. But Anne was wearing sort of women's clothing, just without any sort of ornate details, without the extra fuss. Everything was, I don't want to say slimmed down, but it was stripped to still be, decent clothing of her status, but as plain and simple. And this is where it comes across as masculine. And it's round about this time where people start calling her Gentleman Jack, which was a jeer. They were making fun of her, right? And didn't really bother Anne too much. She was making a point because she was ready to keep her claim in life, So through Isabella, she meets one Mariana Belcom. And when I say she is head over heels, she is absolutely bloody head over heels, right? And she meets her, and they are just absorbed in each other. They have a passionate, wild affair, and they are hoping to be together. Like, they plan to spend their lives together, and they spend time together to the point where they are caught, and Mariana's family are becoming exceedingly aware of the situation, and they are not happy about it at all. They are not happy about this relationship in any sense. And so when Mariana would go visiting, so sometimes she would stay with Anne's house with Anne, and sometimes Anne would come and stay with Mariana in her family home, because ladies did that. They would go visit and stay. It would be a thing, right? And what they do is they arrange for Mariana to be home and for Anne not to be there. And they effectively secret her away and make her get married. They create an elopement. I mean, it's is it a forced wedding? Yes, it is. But the family sort of create the situation for Mariana to marry Charles Lawton, who is this rich as fuck dude. He's rolling in the money. And so she marries him. But that doesn't stop them, because Anne and Mariana, they continue this relationship, and they're doing it like in secret. They're like having sneaky lesbian sex, and they're doing it under the nose of the husband until he discovers them. I'm not sure if he catches them in the act, or whether he like reads a letter or something, or he finds out. He uncovers like Obi-Wan Kenobi in The Attack of the Clones. He very, very slowly uncovers an incredibly simple mystery. And he realizes his wife is having an affair with Anne Lister. And he just straight up banishes Anne from their home, from seeing Mariana. Like, he's just like, nope, done, adios, au revoir, leave. And Mariana, she's actually unaware that Anne is, throughout this time as well, like carrying on affairs with other women. Like, she doesn't know this is happening. See, the thing is, Mariana's husband is much older, so they thought what they could do was just have this secret wee affair, and he would eventually die, and then she would inherit his money, and the two of them would live together. Like, that was their wee plan, right? Now, unfortunately, with Charles finding out about, this is her sister Hanky Panky, not a lot was going to be going on then. Like, put the kibosh on that. Anne Lister is like the George Wickham of riding in Yorkshire, right? Like, it's shocking, actually, because she ends up just going out there and healing her broken heart by being, again, a Regency fuckboy. Because out of all of the women she seduces, one of them is Mariana's sister. Now, I feel like girl code should come in here somehow a wee bit. Like, maybe don't, shag your lover's sister. It feels wrong. Like, don't do that. It's weird. Now, the funny thing is, I don't know what she expected to happen with Mariana at the best of times, because Mariana was embarrassed to be seen out and about with Anne because she dressed all in black, because she dressed like quote unquote a man, right? So she was not going to be going there, I don't think. I think it was more, the idea of it was lovely, but the practicality of it, not so much. So this is sort of a good news, bad news situation, because at this point, all of her brothers have passed away, all of Anne's brothers, leaving her the next heir to the estate, the Shibden estate that her uncle owns. And she is really starting to think more carefully about her social standing and where she's at. But of course, that doesn't stop her from wanting to travel. So she'd already visited Paris like once before with like her aunt, then another time with Mariana. And she had ended up deciding, I'm sick of this right now. I can't be dealing with Mariana and her bullshit and her husband and whatever. And she ends up traveling to Paris. And she goes there and she meets a widow who she spends so much time with that other people start noticing. So she's just forthright and stepping out there, and she meets the very ladylike and pretty Maria Barlow. Maria. So Maria is a widow, but she doesn't have a title, she doesn't have social standing. She's sort of below what Gentleman Jack would typically go for. But she's like, you know what? I'm going to have some of this. But Maria is, because she doesn't come from the same level of society, she doesn't have the same, I want to say, patience. So she's kind of tempestuous. I'm going to go with tempestuous. So she has a temper on her, and Anne, she's not as enamored with her as she was with like Mariana. And so she doesn't really take to this so well. And other people are kind of commenting on how much time that she's spending with her. Partially because she's a widow and partially because she's not of the right class. Now, there's an entry from Anne's diary where she goes and visits like the rooms of 3 separate women on the same night. And she's like trying to get the attention of one but not the other. And she has these quote unquote famous kisses. And she's trying to get the famous kisses, but they're just not happening. So yeah, that's one of her wonderful entries. I think I've got one here actually. Let me read it to you. This is one of the tamer ones, so you're welcome. I'm not going fully graphic with you. I had kissed and pressed Mrs. Barlow on my knee till I had a complete fit of passion. My knees and thighs shook. My breathing and everything told her what was the matter. Like, that's fairly tame. You're welcome. So she was in Paris and she's having this love affair. I would say torrid, but maybe it's more tepid at this point. And she's kind of done. And she wants even more freedom than she had before. And so she decides to continue traveling. Like, initially she calls it her wild but delightful wanderings. And I think basically from like the 20s and the 1820s to 1830s, she spends a lot of her time traveling because she's not really keen on Halifax, to be honest. Yorkshire's just not doing it for her. And so she's just going. I think the fact that she's limited in her options when it comes to being home, whereas travel gives her that freedom, So after her affair with Maria Barlow, she ends up coming back home and again not super keen on being there. And she decides to go for a tour of, northern Italy and Switzerland. And she comes back for a bit. And then she ends up going to Scotland with Sibylla MacLean and spends some time with her there. And a few other people. And she comes back in 1829 and she's there for a wee bit. Again, can't be bothered. And instead ends up heading out to Paris. So she goes to Paris and Belgium and Germany. Well, the German states, parts of Germany. It hasn't quite become Germany yet. And then she heads. So she decides she wants to go to the Pyrenees, the bloody Pyrenees, right? Not, let's go to relax by the seaside. No, I want to climb a fucking mountain. Of course you do. Of course you do, Anne. No chilling for this. So she has a guide who's a smuggler, right? And they and they climb the Breche de Roland Monte Perdido. And so she goes there and she climbs it, and the smuggler effectively signs a thing saying that she's the first person to climb it. And then I think this rich dude afterwards decides he's going to climb it after her, and then he says he's the first person to climb it, and it becomes a whole thing because, of course, the man has to take credit for what the woman did. Except that being said, she also did take credit for the smuggler who had climbed it before she did. Now, she inherits Shibden in the 1820s, right? But like her father and her aunt still have like control over the estate, like technically, but she has moved up the line of succession. She is due to inherit, and she's trying to decide what she's going to do. So Anne, she is due to inherit the estate. We know that, like, she's due to inherit like all the money that goes with it, and she's getting ready to rub shoulders with the highfalutin fancy gentry, and she meets just the person to help her do it. So Ver Hobart, I'm going to call her Ver in this voice because what are my other options? Veer? Is her name Veer? Anyway, she was the sister of the 5th Earl of Buckinghamshire, and she had every connection, like every single one. She had fingers in many pies. And at this point, Anne is learning business because she needs to know how to run the estate because she doesn't want to have to rely on anybody. She wants to be, self-assured. She wants to be able to run things by herself and not reliant on anybody. But what she wants is those societal connections. And Anne is just, I don't say like obsessed, but she's like well into Ver. But Ver has many, many admirers. And Anne doesn't really have options. But Ver has a soft spot for her. And she asks Anne to accompany her on a trip to Hastings. Because Anne, again, is spending a lot of time travelling so she can avoid being at home. And Anne was hoping to win her heart. Unfortunately, Ver, was very much falling within the parameter of society at the time and decided to marry an officer instead. However, as Anne Lister had been reintroduced to Anne Walker, who had inherited so much money, like she was hella rich. And Anne Lister had burnt through so much money travelling and going about and trying to invest in businesses, and she ended up broke, basically. Well, not broke, but like, when rich people say they're poor, they're never usually that poor. So she ends up moving back to Shibden, and she starts really focusing on regenerating it, rejuvenating it. She puts like all this money into it, and she just slowly but surely makes it somewhere where she actually wants to be. And she's getting refurbishments done, and it's during this time where like she's negotiating with like Coleman and trying to get stuff done, and she re-meets Anne Walker, who she met like 15 years previously. And between the two of them, with their joint estates and joint money, they start spending a little bit more time together. Like, while they're together, like, she doesn't quite have her move into Shibden Hall, but she has a private cottage built on her estate called Moss House. And basically after a couple of weeks of meeting together, proper U-Haul, this is the U-Haul lesbians, right? They end up moving in, and they end up shagging up in the shack. Like, they are just fully on board. Like, and after 2 months of them being together, of their secret clandestine liaisons, they decide that they're going to move in to Shipton properly and live together, like as a married couple. But Anne Walker wasn't super into the idea because, again, Regency Britain, and moving in with a woman wasn't really going to be the easiest of decisions. So she asks Anne Lister for 6 months. 6 months to think about it, to work it over. And Lister goes, yep, sure, wait 6 months. And after those 6 months, she's like, I'm still not sure. So Gentleman Jack, clearly not too happy about this situation. And so she goes off on another wee trip. And so she goes to France and Denmark. And she's going on a wee tour. She's going about living her best life to try and distract her from everything. But when she comes back, who is waiting for her at home other than Anne Walker, who, by the way, turned down some dude's proposal? Like, this other fella wanted to marry this very rich, titled woman, and she said no because she wanted to be with Anne. And so Anne at this point is 42, and she's like, yes, absolutely, brilliant. So being wealthy women in society, the two of them rewrite their wills to effectively, so one happens to one or one happens to the other, like they're beneficiaries of each other's will. Like, over this time as well, like throughout this speckled, was Mariana, who every now and again would pop in and they would have an illicit affair and she would pop back out again. And this kind of happened here and there throughout Anne Lister's life. But when she married symbolically, she had a Boston wedding, really, where she married Anne Walker, where they said little vows to each other in the church, and they took communion, and Bob's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt, married. Is it legal? Doesn't matter. So they are, for all intents and purposes, married. And Mariana sends a letter and she's like, oh, at least be happy. And Anne's like, cool, will do, thanks, bye. And they decide to honeymoon in France and Switzerland. Why do I always say France? It's always a weird thing. So they end up honeymooning and they start heading about. And they come back to Yorkshire after spending some time away. And, well, shockingly enough, they are being made fun of one way or the other, including the rumour mill. Like, it gets to the point that people are sending anonymous letters. Like, they're like addressed to Captain Lister, basically making fun of Anne. And in the newspaper, somebody puts in an advertisement, right? They put in an announcement of the union of Captain Tom Lister of Shibden Hall to Miss Anne Walker. Like, I understand it's the past, but you've got a bloody load of time on your hands, pal. Like, slow news day? What is it? There are things happening, I'm fairly certain, and you're just like, oh, you know what? We'll just do a fake marriage announcement to make fun of a happy couple. I say happy, it wasn't all plain sailing. Because Anne Walker, she was anxious and shy, and she was easily stressed, right? And she suffered from like depressive moods. And Anne Lister is just like focusing on like renovations and living her best life. And yeah, the amount of money being shelled out in this was just stressing Anne Walker the fuck out. And it got to the point that Lister starts assuming that her wife is faking illnesses just to avoid having to go places. And so Gentleman Jack often travelled alone, out adventuring, seeing the world, so on and so forth. However, she does manage to convince Anne Walker to come on a trip with her to Russia. So they leave for Russia in June 1839. They think this is going to be super swell, really fun time. They go, the two of them, two servants, because of course they're rich, titled ladies. You can't be going anywhere without your servants. And they travel in their own carriage. They're going through France, through Denmark, Sweden, and Russia. And they end up in St. Petersburg in September, and in October they're in Moscow. Now this is winter time in Russia. Why would you want to be in Russia in winter? Why? Like, it's cold enough there, and do you think to go in winter is a good time? Anne, I know you've read books. I know you've looked at a map, have basic orienteering knowledge, and you think this is a good idea. No. So they end up leaving Moscow with a very reluctant Anne Walker, who just does not enjoy the travel. She's not keen on it. She'd rather sit at home with her Ovaltine and a wee book and a jigsaw and chill out, which I understand. I really do. So they managed to leave in February with a new Russian carriage and lovely toasty cozy warm clothing, because again, winter in Russia. So they are going down along the frozen Volga River to Caucasus. Again, not really optimum travel, because this is a lot of Europeans tended to avoid this area, mainly because, cold as fuck. But, it was bad enough to go on your own, but these are women effectively travelling alone, and it got to the point where they actually had to have military escorts through some of it. And Anne Walker, she had wanted to go home after probably the first leg of the journey, let alone after Moscow, but she wanted to go home. But Anne Lister wanted to keep travelling, and so she relented because, of course she did. And so they end up in Georgia, the country, not the state. I've had a habit of just explaining, like, if I'm talking about Georgia, the state, or Georgia, the country. Sometimes I feel like I really need to just confirm that sometimes. So yeah, they end up in Georgia. And Anne's last diary entry is on the 11th of August, 1840. She makes some observations about the village, about her tea, about time for bed, and it's the last thing she ever writes. So she ends up getting either bitten or stung. Like, there's an insect involvement somehow. So she's either stung or bitten, and this ends up triggering a fever. And 6 weeks later, on the 22nd of September, 1840, Anne Lister passes away at the age of 49. And her wife, Anne Walker, finally gets to return home with Anne. And it is not an easy journey. It's long. It's 8 months. 8 months of travel back to Halifax. And Anne Lister is buried in Halifax Minster on the 29th of April 1841. And up until the year 2000. Like, her grave had sort of disappeared. Her tombstone was covered with a floor from like the 1870s or something. And it gets discovered in like the millennium. Now, Anne Lister's will, it had given a life interest to Anne Walker. So she was always going to be funded and cared for, but the estate itself was going to go to Lister's relatives. And Anne Walker had decided that she was going to live in Shipton Hall and she was going to take care of it and she was going to, keep it in the glory to which Anne had wanted. Unfortunately, her mental health took a turn and, well, unlike Eliza, she wasn't committed to an asylum. She was put into private houses and she went to live with like her sister and her brother-in-law, back to Shibden House for a little while, and Shibden Hall, and eventually back to her childhood home in Lightcliff. Now, like I said in the beginning, one of the reasons why we know so much about Anne Lister's life is because Anne Lister kept a very, very detailed diary. Like, there is almost 5 million words in it. Like, it would take 9 years, I think, to read the whole thing. And when like her great grandnephew or whatever ended up finding John Lister, when he ended up finding the diaries and eventually decoding them, like, I just love the fact that everyone thought it was like a big hoax, because they were like, oh no, lesbians aren't real. But yeah, and when they were first translated, they were published without any of the naughty bits in, and then other researchers came forward and started editing it and put some of the filthy stuff back in. But there's like teams. I think it needs to be separated into teams to finally get the entire diary like transcribed, because otherwise, yeah, we're not going to do that. We're not going to let AI do that. That's stupid. But anyway, that is the tale of Anne Lister, Gentleman Jack, the first modern lesbian. If you liked my retelling of this tale, feel free to rate and review 5 stars. Ding, ding, ding. I've been chewing over my words. I hope it's not too bad this episode, because my mouth is having issues again. It's not fun, but we will get over it together. But I shall actually not forget recommendation time, nor will I forget the... What am I doing? Yes, I'm on the socials. Follow me on the socials. Link in the description down below. But we should also... I'm not tired. I'm very tired. But we should also recommendation time. So I'm going to recommend The League of Lady Poisoners for reading. Oh, I couldn't help myself. For watching, like, I don't watch new things. I'm really bad for it. But you should watch Only Murders in the Building. I'm now finally watching season 3, and oh God, Paul Rudd, his character makes me cringe so much. It makes me uncomfortable, but it's good. It's good to feel uncomfortable. We have to get used to it. And for listening, oh, now there's a decision. You should listen to the Date Night podcast with Blind Burka. I promised her I would always refer to her as Blind, like in this voice, Blind Burka. And so you should absolutely listen to Date Night. It's fabulous. And yes, with that, I shall bid you good night. Adios. Au revoir. Auf Wiedersehen, my friends. Bye bye.